Creepy times ahead. Join us as we talk about the strange, the unknown, and the unexplained. Things that shouldn't happen, but do. If it's nighttime where you are, dim the lights, sit back, relax, and listen intently as we explore the edges of reality. Welcome to Paratalk.
Sounds like a lot of supernatural baloney to me.
Supernatural, perhaps. Baloney, perhaps not.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Paratalk. I'm Gareth Davies, and once again I'm joined by paranormal enthusiast Mr. Reeves Cooke. This week we discuss the Broadhaven School UFO. Hello, Reeves.
Hello, Gareth. Yes. I think we haven't touched on UFOs for a bit, and I thought we'd give an episode dedicated to UFOs, but also UFOs that are seen by multiple witnesses.
Yeah, and this case would be one of those. And this case, I guess, it's kind of indicative to many cases in the late 70s, early 80s. There were a lot of stories very similar to this one popping up, not just in the UK, but all over the world. There was the one in Russia. There was one in Australia, and in several other places. But we're going to focus on this one today. So where do we begin with this tale?
Broadhaven, it's a small seaside village located in Wales. On the coast, so it's quite a small place, and it's mainly it kind of gets its money from tourism. So it's got a kind of a small kind of community of people, and this event is based around primarily around a primary school in that area. In February, the 4th of February 1977 is when this took place. Now, obviously, like all children, you have your dinner and you go out to play. And it's in the afternoon. This is a daytime event. This isn't something that happened at night there's lights in the sky. This is an actual daylight, which I think are quite rare anyway, but a full daylight event that is seen by multiple people, and not just children, it's seen by adults as well. So the children are getting ready to go back in for their afternoon schooling, and a few of them notice an object which is seen out across an adjoining field that's similar in a similar radius to where their school playing fields are, and they watch it for a while. And as they're watching it, more children come and group together, as kids do, and they're watching this object, and it's kind of hovering above the grass, and then to them it lands, and then it kind of takes off again, and it's hovering. By this time, a quite a large group of children have congregated. Up to 14 children were there, all watching this object. Now, at the object, eventually it lands, and they witness what you can only describe as a humanoid figure come out of the craft and standing outside of the craft. When they're asked later on, which we'll cover in a little bit, what the figure looked like. They said he was in a silver suit, whether that's a one-piece suit or,
like a spaceman, right? But, I'm assuming the kids, when asked what they would have said the word spaceman.
They called him a spaceman, and they said he had large pointed ears as well, which is very odd. Because if you think about it, one thing I wanted to touch on this area is that we don't really get, when people have visitations or they have experiences in modern times, we don't seem to get that kind of quirky aspect of the aliens look very strange. If you go back to
very true.
the 70s, the 60s, the late 60s, the 70s, the early 80s, when people would report UFO incidents, if they kind of remembered what the aliens looked like, they normally look, oh, he was a monster, or he had giant ears, or massive hands, or great big feet. We don't get that now. It's all kind of this grey. It's all like the greys.
That's what you're saying is mostly true, because there are still reports of
But there are,
looking beings, but they're definitely in the minority.
In the minority, yeah. But anyway, so these children, they're watching this, and this is going on for, this is something that happens, for a few minutes. This goes on for a considerable amount of time. A large portion of the afternoon, they're watching this object moving around and up and down, and they see this humanoid figure. And another teacher that comes out, a female teacher comes out, and she witnesses this object as well, doing its, showing off and stuff. And she takes note of what she's seen, and obviously, she wants to see what all the children are making a hullabaloo about. And of course, after the sighting, when it raises to the sky, and it kind of hangs in the sky a little bit, so maybe it's giving people a final look, who knows? And then it goes at tremendous speed, and it moves behind some trees, and it's gone. That's kind of the sighting for those children over. Now,
do you know how long the entire sighting lasted?
In total, it was a couple of hours.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite a considerable sighting. It wasn't something that happened in a few minutes. This was, they'd seen it in the sky. It was in the sky. It was moving around, and then it looked like it landed, and it looked like it took off again, and it hovered around, and then it eventually landed, and then they saw this humanoid figure emerge, and then he was, I'm saying here, it was outside of the craft, and then he went back, and and so it was a whole kind of event of things that took place. Now, the headmaster was quite concerned about this, because all the kids this is another thing. None of the children were scared. They weren't scared of what was going on. They were more amazed at what they were seeing. They were more focused on just paying attention to what was happening. No children were crying. No children were running around screaming. They were quite excited by what they were seeing. So, after the event, the headmaster got all the children, these 14 children, together, and he interviewed them one by one, and he got them.
He separated them, right, and had them draw pictures and stuff.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, he basically, what he wanted to do, because children, they what's the best way for a child to convey something to you? Draw a picture. So he got them. He said, look, draw a picture of what you saw. And do it individually, so no one's copying. He got them to all to draw the pictures, and then when they were all drawn their pictures, they put them together. And even though there was some difference in the pictures, slight differences, primarily all of the pictures showed the same.
They're all very, very similar.
The same sort of event. With the craft on the floor, and then some drew a little creature, some drew the craft in the sky, some drew, you got
to understand, with children also, they have this thing called imagination. And even though they're trying to be accurate, they can't resist adding, making it bigger than it actually is, or adding things that weren't necessarily there. But if you look at the photographs, and you can search online, and not the photographs, I'm sorry, the pictures, the pictures, the drawings. If you search online, you can see them. And while they do vary wildly, the basic concept of the event is very well laid out.
Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, so they got the description, and of course, this was verified by one of the teachers who witnessed the event as well. The craft, it was a cigar-shaped craft, and it was a kind of a silver metallic in color. It had what looked like a dome on top of the craft, and on top of the dome there was like a red kind of light on top of that. Now, some describe it as having what seemed to be either windows or portals around the outside. So obviously we've got this cigar-shaped object, and they liken it to about the size, approximately, of a double-decker bus. So for anyone
that's pretty big.
familiar with what I mean by double-decker bus, if you think of a London bus, the ones with the upstairs, the red buses, about that size. So it's quite a considerable size. It's a very noticeable size. Now, so this obviously, the school, the teacher as well kind of validated what the children were saying. She said, this was an object, it was silver, and so forth. So there was a kind of a correlation with, because obviously you say children have got imagination, they can add things to the story, and elaborate. But it was kind of, they kind of were on the same line, And as I say, that the headmaster also got the children together, and after the event had happened, he got them to draw out all of their, their events. But so, I mean, that kind of encapsulates that event. But there was a number of other events that happened in and around that area on the following months, and a couple of them are a bit. I've noted them because a couple of them are a bit strange, and when I say strange, I think just plain weird. I mean, there was a lady that basically had a farm, local farm that Mrs. Coombs, her name was, and she had a local farm that was reasonably nearby. Their farm kind of backed off into a kind of a bay area, so overlooked fields at the water.
Hello?
She was experiencing
I
light
lost you
phenomena.
then. Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Yeah, you went off for a second there.
Did I?
Yeah, just for a second as you were talking.
Okay, so where would I go from?
Mrs. Coombs.
Okay, so I'm going to take it from Mrs. Coombs, and then you can edit it out.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Coombs, who was working on the local farm, she was experiencing light phenomenon that would come onto her farm. It wouldn't land or anything like that, but she would see this phenomenon in the sky, and it was a number of coloured orbs which would whiz by her farmhouse. You can imagine her farmhouse is like pretty much in the middle of nowhere, on the edge of the coast. You've got fields and you've got the sea, so and a bay area. She had quite this didn't really bother her because it's like, what is it? I don't know. So go about my business. But she did have what she admits to an extremely terrifying encounter one day when she witnessed these lights, and she was out doing her chores. She was in the farm area, and she came back to the house because she thought, well, these are a bit weird. I'm coming back to the house. And as she was walking back to the house, quite a large farmhouse, large windows. You could clearly see that, 4 windows, She looks and she sees in the bottom window a humanoid figure dressed in silver, standing, looking out of the window toward her. And, of course, she was immediately petrified because...
I'm a little confused. Looking out of the window of...
her house. It's in her house, in her home.
It's in the house.
It's in her home, looking out of the window toward her.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So immediately she's terrified because she's seeing these lights in the sky, and then she turns around, goes back to the house, the farmhouse, and she sees this. She's too scared to go in the house. Don't blame her. She recounts that, judging by the size and the width of the window and all that this individual was nearly 7 foot tall. So that's over 2 meters.
Yeah.
That's quite a tall. You do get 7 feet tall people, but it's not kind of the norm.
Right.
She was so scared to go back in the house that she didn't know what to do. She gave it some time, and she got up, the courage. This was a good couple of hours. She left and she came back, and the individual, whatever it was gone. Of course, she reported the incident, explained what it was. There was no traces or anything like that of anyone being there.
But it wasn't like the house was was broken into or
no.
Yeah,
so there was There was no traces. She was, but she was obviously she was too frightened to go inside because obviously you've seen someone
Yeah.
we could liken this. I mean, what's interesting about these accounts is not only is there an account here, but there is also another account in the 1970s of a similar in the reasonable area in Wales of Mark Madsen. He was a young boy. He was about 10, 11 years old, young lad, and he was out walking in a kind of a rural area, and this is in the sort of the 70s, I would say, mid 70s era, and he noticed an individual, what you'd say, which he called him a spaceman, but a humanoid figure. And he witnessed this individual. He had the suit on and everything. He was running, but the fact was that what was weird about a man out running? Well, the weird thing was that you can imagine the gates that close off to keep the cattle in and stuff. The large metal gates.
Yeah.
This individual was bounding those gates in one jump.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. Unless you're a long jumper or something. But he was bounding these gates, and the young guy ran down to see, if he could see. And of course, he watched the individual run off across the field and around into the bushes and was gone.
Did he describe the individual? What did he look like?
He described him. He said that he was wearing like a all-in-one like silver suit, but he obviously didn't This was a very quick experience. But there was another individual that had a very strange, a very strange encounter as well. And this happened 2 months after the original school event. So the school event happened in February. This happened would have been sort of a couple of months later. So there's a hotel, the Haven Fort Hotel, and the individual, Rosa Granville, she tells how one evening she came out from the hotel. Now, the hotel was there's some fields adjacent to the hotel. She came out from the hotel and she noticed what she explains is an upside down saucer was in the field. And it was landed in the field. And she noticed that what she was seeing was what appeared to be an individual outside of the craft. The craft seemed to emanate a very bright. She called it a hot light, but a very bright light in her vicinity. And she when somebody, when you've got one of those really powerful lights and somebody shines it at you and you can feel it on your face, that kind of hotness.
Yeah.
Like that. She explains it was like a hot feeling. The light was like hot, when it touched her, when it came to her skin. And she had this experience. She watched this craft and then it took off and it went away. But there was tracks and stuff. There was some marks left in the grass. They went back the next day to look. She took some people back, and there were scorch marks in the ground, similar to the school event. But the downside with the school event was, even though when they looked where the craft was, there were marks on the grass, they'd had a really bad downpour on that night, and it had washed traces away. So they'd lost those traces. But they had a post, like a post going up in the school, and that had become damaged. So maybe the craft had bumped into it or something had affected it in some way. But the post was near where the sighting took place, and the post had some damage to it. It was bent. So there's a possibility there that there was traces left. Of course, outside investigators got involved. They took all the information. Even to this day, it still remains a bit of a mystery as to what happened. But the interesting thing is that all of these cases here, we have with people who recount what they see these individuals in silver suits. Of course, when we look at these cases here, we can think of things like the Cumberland Spaceman. And when with the picture of the young girl with this individual, allegedly individual in the background, looks like he's got a silver suit on. And there's other cases as well where these individuals are wearing what looks like some form of all-in-one suit. Now, there were some theories, obviously, out there. And I have to say that this is a big red flag for me as to they're trying to play down what actually happened. Now, when the officials, the military, government got involved, they brought in experts to take all the information, measurements, and look at what happened and interview people, and then correlate all that together and come up with a possible plausible reason as to what the children saw and what everyone else saw and what possibly could have been a reason for them, what they saw. Now, the first thing that they came up with was the children had been mistaken, and it was not a spaceship that they saw. It was actually a fertilizer tank on wheels. The big cylindrical tanks that farmers use that put all the waste in it, and then they spray it on the fields. They're quite large. They suggested that is what the children saw.
Yeah, but the last time I checked is that those big fertilizer tanks don't fly.
They don't fly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what they were saying. Anyway, so they raised the point. Okay, well, that was that. But what about the individuals that, the individual that the children and
the silver suited guy, the big 7 foot tall silver suited.
Yeah, the individual that they saw by the craft. Well, they came back to the conclusion that what they saw was an American Navy soldier, naval soldier, who was wearing a fire retardant suit, which the kind of things that you wear on when you do, you're fireman and you have to put out like planes and stuff. You wear those thick silver suits that protect you. That it was one of those people that they saw who had obviously got a little bit lost, and that was the possibility. And also when they questioned, what about the things in the sky? Their theory to that was, that was Harrier jets that were from there was a local base, and they were on exercises. They were flying around, and you possibly also saw one of those hovering in the sky. So we had all these kind of. And also another thing.
There was one more with the, if I remember correctly, for the silver suited people. Years later, some people came forward.
Jokers, the tank jokers.
That they borrowed like one of those fire suits from one of the oil refineries nearby.
Yep.
And basically played a practical joke on the people in Broadhaven.
Yeah, because
I guess it went too far.
Because of all of the sightings that were going on prior and after these main events, there was allegedly a couple of these individuals. They were like a group of jokers, and they wanted to play a prank on everyone, and they thought it would be funny to kind of fake a UFO event to see if it would, see how far they could push it. Exactly. I find that a little hard to believe because of there's so many different witnesses and so many different people who had seen things. I do,
but even if they had done that, and even if some of the sightings were them kidding around in a silver suit, that still doesn't explain everything. Especially the sightings of the school children, and the dinner lady and the people that worked at the school, the adults that actually saw this thing flying and landing, and a silver creature or being coming out of this craft.
Yeah. Actually, the lady who had her experience at the hotel, she saw in the craft, when the craft was landed, she looked and she said the craft had windows, and she could see individuals looking at the windows, but she said looking out. But the scariest thing was she couldn't see they had any faces. whether they were wearing like visors over their faces or something, as a possibility where the visor's frosted and it's one way or something. You get mirrored visors on your motorcycle.
Yeah.
But that's interesting, and I don't know why there would be a massive a military exercise which would be so similar that could be mistaken for UFOs and spacemen, when it's pretty obvious that if you saw a person walking around in a silver suit, or you saw an aircraft hovering, you could pretty much. Well, another thing as well, there was no sound. The only sound that they heard was one of the teachers that witnessed it. She remembers that the strange thing was there was no sound apart from
completely silent,
very, very low humming.
Mm-hmm. And that's very common with most UFO sightings. As you see a craft in the sky, sometimes close up, sometimes enormous, and one of the staggering things that you notice is that this thing is floating essentially, and making no sound whatsoever, because we're so used to when we see an aircraft fly over our heads, there's always a sound. When we see a helicopter go by, there's always sound, and we've associated things in the sky in motion. There's a sound associated with it. So when we see large craft in the sky completely silent, it adds an extra level of unnerving,
Definitely,
strangeness to the event.
And this happens in many UFO cases where people see huge objects in the sky, the triangles, for example, and there's absolutely no sound, and it's kind of like it's kind of runs through the whole UFO thing where there are times, obviously, when people have sightings and they hear there's like a hissing sound or like what they call a steam sound, or a generator sound or stuff like that, or even times when UFOs seem to be spurting out what looks like fire and smoke. There are those times, but most of the time when you see an object like this, there's no sound and
it's silence.
And that is scary. But I think with this case, it's great because there's so many witnesses, and it's very rare to get a case that happens where there is an actual landing and people see it.
Mm-hmm. And not only witnesses, but when you have a lot of children, how many children? You said there's like 14?
14.
14 children that witnessed this thing. And there's that old adage, the only people that tell the truth are drunks and children. Right? Because usually when a child sees something, they're going to tell you the truth, and especially if there's 14 of them all saying the same story. I mean, maybe a little variant here and there, but basically the same story coming from all of their mouths. It tells you that something really did happen. And then you have the staff of the school, the adults, who also witnessed it, adding an extra level of authenticity to this.
I also think that the teachers, the kids go to the school every day. The teachers know when they're kind of making stuff up or not. They kind of, they're there every day, So I think they've got a good handle on if they're elaborating on stuff or if they're telling the truth. And I think
I agree completely.
Some of those kids today, they still talk about it like it. They can remember it.
They're all middle-aged people now, middle-aged men and women with families of their own, and they still are convinced of what they saw. They still have the memory of that day in 1977.
Yeah, it's a fantastic.
I think the school incident I think is legitimate. Something really did happen. The other cases, with the silver man jumping over the fence and the one in the house, I'm on the fence with those. Those may or may not be legitimate. I don't know, but I'm convinced the schoolyard UFO incident really did happen. There's a number of books that came out about this in the late 70s, early 80s. There was 3, and I think I have them all, but they're all in pretty bad shape. They're all kind of falling apart. There's one called The Welsh Triangle.
Yeah.
Which goes over this. Another one is The David Enigma. And then finally there's the one, The Uninvited, which sounds like a ghost novel,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's UFO Encounters at Ripperston Farm, which is in the Broadhaven area.
Yes.
In Wales. So there's 3 books for listeners who might be interested in this. Maybe you're from Wales, or you have friends and family in Wales, and this is a new story that's popped into your consciousness. 3 books for you to seek out: The David Enigma, The Welsh Triangle, and The Uninvited. Well, Reeves, thank you so much. Another
You're welcome.
great case. So one of my favorites, a good classic one from Wales, where the school children at Broadhaven Primary School witnessed something very, very strange in February 1977. Thanks again, and we'll be back very soon with some more Paratalk.